This is April 3rd, 1986, Julie Strong interviewing Dr. Connie Yerwood about Dr. Everett H. Givens for the Black Enterprise project devoted to East 6th Street between 1890 and 1920.
Perhaps I don't contribute that much to you. Excuse me. I'm having my problems this morning.
Morning problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Tell me how you knew Dr. Givens.
Well, but he and my father grew up together. And they were very good friends, and that's how I happened to know him. Yeah, he was a long time friend of the family.
You didn't by any chance know Morris Givens and Julia Humboldt Givens, did you?
No.
No. Okay.
So that was those were his parents.
Right.
I didn't
Way before your time.
That's right.
Right. Do you have any idea why he went to dental school?
No, I really don't. I have no idea of what his incentive was at all.
Did he go to Howard?
He went to Howard University School of Dentistry, yes. He was a graduate of Howard. Oh, I think he graduated somewhere around 1907 or 8 or 9, somewhere along there, I think.
Okay. Did you ever hear your father mention any awards or any recognition that Dr. Givens received while at Howard?
No, I didn't. No, surely didn't.
Why would he have chosen Howard?
Well, that's a mystery. I do not know.
So there were...
I know of no one from here who might have... who was a graduate of Howard, who could have been... well, a sort of a role model that he would want to emulate.
The reason I ask is, I have, in working with the other doctors and dentists here, I had occasion to get in touch with the Meharry registrar and found that every one of them went to Meharry.
I do not, that has always, something I've always wondered about, but never bothered to ask about, to inquire about.
Seems like Meharry would...
He's the only one I know of from Austin who went to Howard.
Yeah, that's curious.
Yeah.
Was he your dentist? He was?
That's right. In fact, he was one of the ones who would treat us when we were children. Most dentists didn't want to be bothered with children. But he would. He just gave me, I think, my first filling and first extractions, which were really the deciduous teeth,
Were there other doctors, other dentists who would treat children at that time besides Dr. Givens?
Well, Dr. Givens was the only one here for a while, except I told you about the woman that was here. I never went to her at all. And she dealt, apparently, with children, from what I understand. But you see, Dr. Givens was this close friend of my father. They lived about 5 doors from each other. They grew up together. They were just very close friends. And very unalike.
Very unalike?
Yes. It was interesting in a way that they were as close as they were to be so different.
Well, how were they different? What were Dr. Givens' characteristics?
Well, Dr. Givens was interested in politics, and my father was not. Dr. Givens was sort of a friendly fellow who enjoyed the company of others. He, in recreational activities and so forth, and my father was working on the conservatism. While he was friendly and all that, he did not participate in certain types of recreational activities.
So Givens was a much more outgoing personality than your father.
A very outgoing person, and very interested in politics.
Do you have any idea how he got into politics and when? What his early involvements were?
Well, he never was a candidate for any political office himself. He just was interested in seeing that those who were in the running were involved in working to the betterment of the minority groups, particularly.
Can you?
I don't recall that he ever ran for any office at all. He usually encouraged somebody else to do so.
Okay. Do you remember specific candidates whom he encouraged or supported?
Well, during Dr. Gibbons' time, the candidates were primarily Anglo, and he was friendly with some, and he would work with them. And I guess the one that I remember best is the mayor, Tom Miller. And there were others, I'm sure, that he preferred somebody else, but he was very friendly with him. And, of course, Lyndon Johnson as a senator in Washington. And, of course, when he began to move up, he was quite him. And also the speaker.
Sam Rayburn.
Huh?
Sam Rayburn.
Sam Rayburn. In fact, he went to Sam Rayburn's funeral. There was a picture, I believe, in the Austin American.
Yes, I saw
there
it.
were two separate papers, I believe, at that time. I think they were still separate. One was based on American, I believe, still at that time. Do you have that picture?
Yes, ma'am,
I
I
do. Well, you know that about that thing.
Interesting story. Well, so he... Did he support Tom Miller? I mean, did he help get out the... How did he support him?
Oh, well, back in those days, there were political meetings that were held, and they were referred to primarily as mass meetings. And they would be held, and then these candidates would come out and speak to minority groups, that sort of thing. And Dr. Gibbons was usually the instigator of those meetings, planning them and getting them together and speaking out for the persons that he thought were qualified or who were liberal in their thinking toward minority people.
Okay. Let me catch up with you. I'm taking notes, too. Okay. I've been told that Gibbons was instrumental in either getting people to register to vote or to rescind the poll tax.
That's right.
And the person who told me couldn't remember which one. What do you know about either one of these and Gibbons' involvement?
Well, I think he probably was interested in both, but he did work diligently toward the effort of minority for blacks. I guess I better say that to be franchised.
Right.
Because we were not allowed to vote in the Democratic primary, and that was one of the main fights. And he supported Smith, I believe, Dr. Smith, who there again was a dentist. And in his case, and I don't have that in my fingertips. It's been so long ago, so I've forgotten the detail on that.
Now, who was?
You probably have that information somewhere.
No, I don't. What is? Who is Dr. Smith? Was he an Austin dentist?
He was the guy who filed the suit.
Oh.
He filed the suit. And Dr. Gibbons was a big supporter of this. And
now, where did he file the suit?
I think that's who was filed it.
Okay.
I think that's where it was filed. And of course, he won. And of course, we were then able to vote in the Democratic primary.
Now, was that a different event from the April 1944 Supreme Court decision?
That's it.
That's the same decision. So you mean that whole decision emanated from the suit?
Well, it took a long time to get those things together, and you you had to be sure that you were going to get somewhere with it, so the work was insidious, really, and you had to get certain persons to understand your complaint and deal with them and get them to understand your motives and your purposes. And there were not too many. Those who were liberal enough and who were in agreement with the fact that this should be done were afraid that they would be labeled, and consequently, even those who were for it didn't often want to become involved and speak out. So it took time. It took a lot of time. Just because things didn't happen until a certain time doesn't mean that it hadn't been worked on.
Right, so many years probably preceded that event.
Years and years of struggle.
Was Dr. Smith a black?
Yes.
Okay.
And I wish Ada Simon would have done this, but I don't know. So she knows all that. She has it at her fingertips and remembers the dates, because she researched it again and reviewed it. And when you do, you get it refreshed.
Right, I know. So as far as you know, Gibbons' role was a supportive one.
A supportive one. He never took the... now, for instance, he probably would have never himself been the one to be the guinea pig, as we called it. See, Smith was as much a guinea pig in this voting situation as Heman Sweat was the guinea pig in breaking the situation at the University of Texas. You've always got to have somebody who is willing to do it, and in many instances, it breaks the person.
Yes.
Like it broke Heman Sweat. He was never any good after that, not at all. And it's a trying, dangerous sort of thing and everything. And people go through an awful struggle in those situations because the family suffers, the person suffers, and even the in-laws and outlaws suffer and going through all of this. The apprehensions, anxieties, and the pressures are extremely great.
So you think that Gibbons was
a promoter more than anything. Maybe that's what I should call it. That he was a good promoter of racial problems. You know, not the problem, not a promoter's problem, but the cure of the problem or the changes that would take place.
Well, do you think that it was with knowledge that he understood how difficult such a process was going to be, and therefore he understood that his role was best as an instigator and as a promoter rather than serving as the front line guinea pig?
I think his attitude was sort of to be in the background, and yet he was not in the background. He was quite forward in what he wanted and what he believed in and all. But I think his belief was that I am not the person to do it, but I am the person to
facilitate it.
To facilitate or to help in the struggle.
Do you remember that he provided any organization or any role in getting people to pay their poll taxes so that they could vote in the presidential?
Oh yes. Those were part of the whole effort.
So was there an organization that actually went and got people and took them to pay their poll taxes, or what role did he play?
Other than the NAACP did that, and that was a cooperative relationship between Dr. Gibbons. He didn't always agree with the methods by which NAACP frequently, locally particularly, did things, but he was not opposed necessarily to some things that were done, but on the other hand, I guess there are others of us who were not altogether pleased with the manner by which things were done, but you take the course of the least of the evils.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that was his attitude. He would cooperate and was a member and all that kind of thing. But very often did not agree with their approaches and methods or something of the sort.
Mm-hmm.
And
but do you think that he found the NAACP too aggressive in?
no, I don't think it was that. I think it was the let's see, what shall I call it? Anyway, you see, Dr. Gibbons had the privilege of knowing some of these people, and I think he felt that negotiations were better than
Confrontation.
Mm-hmm. Now, when it came to the legal aspect, well, of course, that was fine, which is the legal aspect, but he would have been, for instance, I think he would have been bitterly opposed to some of the confrontations that we have seen, which in some instances have really been somewhat pointless.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whether to demonstrate or not to demonstrate, you know, in the opinion of some people, is a question that your own conscience, I guess, has to answer for you.
Mm-hmm.
But some of them have appeared pointless.
Mm-hmm.
And when a quiet negotiation with persons who have influence and who have standing in the community and with whom you could discuss and get things done rather than the aggressive. I guess it's a matter of degree.
Mm-hmm.
Rather, because nobody could be any more boisterous than Dr. Gibbons. He was tall and big and gruff when he wanted to be, and he could be the most polite individual, but his stature demanded respect.
Uh-huh. You mean his sheer size?
His size.
Uh-huh.
Just his mere appearance
Uh-huh.
demanded respect.
Mm-hmm.
And he made the city council meetings all the time, and he knew what was going on. He knew what was going to be presented. And, of course...
did he stand up at council
oh,
meetings
yes.
and speak out?
Oh, yes.
Uh-huh.
And you see, the procedures were a little different to what they are now. You've got to get on an agenda and all that kind of stuff now. Well, that was true then.
Uh-huh.
Back there in those days, you know, you could be heard. Because Austin was a very small place then, too.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
You know, it was nothing like it is now.
So he attended these meetings with frequency, and he spoke out with frequency.
He spoke out very frequently. Yes, he did. Dr. Gibbons, I feel, is primarily responsible for this Doris Miller recreation center that we have out here in East Austin.
Oh, really?
We were not allowed to use the city auditorium.
Oh.
And, ask me about it. I'll tell you, there was nothing you could use in Austin.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the answer to that. So you put forth an effort to get whatever facilities that you could where you could have some freedom of recreation and freedom of cultural activities and the like, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And we had no place other than our churches and occasionally our schools, the auditorium, you know, in the school building. The segregated schools, because that's what they were
Right.
at that time.
So you really did have to fight for any other additional cultural facility, and the Doris Miller Auditorium was one of those.
That was, yes, that's the most.
Now,
Well, the whole park idea out there, Dr. Gibbons worked hard to even get any consideration of a recreational area,
now what park?
such as Rosewood Park. That's where Doris Miller Auditorium is, but we had the Rosewood Park. He had worked diligently to get that.
He had.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that incident specifically about Rosewood Park?
About what he did?
Uh-huh.
No, because it was a long effort on his part, and as a youngster myself, you know, I wasn't that concerned.
But you do know that he was influential
I knew
in the...
that he, and mostly what I heard would be what I would hear him say to my father or something like that. You know, they would be talking about it, and primarily that's it.
All right, well, you know, Rosewood Park was purchased in 1929 by the city.
Uh-huh.
So that places his political activities
Oh, his political activity would go back even farther than that. I would believe that it goes back further than that to whatever development took place in East Austin. He and D.R. Woodard and William Tears and Louis Lyons and persons like that, they were active in the community in an effort to get the separate but equal. It was never the equal. Most of the time it was the zero.
Yeah.
That's right. Most of the time it was zero. And when Rosewood Park was finally developed and a swimming pool put in, all right, we couldn't go to any of the swimming pools. We couldn't go. The only thing we could do was go out to Onion Creek or somewhere and swim in the creek or in the river. And people who own property on waterways of whatever type is what you had. And
well, so aren't we talking about two different things, though, when we talk about the swimming pool at Rosewood? Wasn't that a later development than the actual acquisition of the land?
Oh, of course. They had to have the land before you could build a swimming pool.
But it is your memory that he participated in both efforts.
That, so far as I can understand, he
Okay.
did.
Okay.
Oh, yes. You see, the acquisition of the land first, and then the development.
Right.
It had to be developed because there wasn't anything out there.
Yeah.
Except that old house.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying right now to find out a little bit about the history of the acquisition of Rosewood. I know some personal history because the place was bought from my husband's family.
Really?
But I'm trying to find through the Parks and Recreation Department more about, hopefully, Given's role in that. That's why I'm sort of questioning you about.
Well, I don't know how much of that you would find in any written form or any information down there because, it's just like a birth registration. They didn't register Negroes and dogs.
Yeah.
Their births were not registered.
Yeah.
And neither were their deaths. But, and Texas was still is a very backward state in that Texas didn't come into the registration area until 1933.
Yeah.
So, when you're from the wild and woolly West, the feeling was, what does it matter, But Dr. Givens, as I say, his name may not appear on anything, but the effort put forth, and sometimes it was easier to do these things in a subtle manner, playing on your friendship with your liberal acquaintances, and getting them to speak up in the area where it would do the most good and that kind of thing. In many instances, that is the way things would get started. And in those same instances, those people were not going to say, perhaps, that Dr. Givens has talked with me and this, that, and other. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't, Sometimes it wasn't expedient maybe to do that. And one thing about him, he indicated no fear of anything. Now, he would be very outspoken. And when they'd have these mass meetings and all, if he didn't like what was said, he would let them know in no uncertain terms that he did not like what they said.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. He would. He would. And he was quite a character when it came to speaking out for the impoverished and the neglected and the discriminated. And that's what minorities were during that particular time, very much discriminated against. Now, I don't know what else I can...
Oh, I've got some more questions. I'm just writing to catch up with you. I ran across a reference to Dr. Given's role that I can't track down, and I'm hoping you can help me. This was a reference in a publication published about 1940. It was talking about him, and it said that he was quite instrumental in the passage of a $4.5 million bond issue that resulted in blacks getting a proportionate share of the bond issue for East Austin improvements. And the article or the text went on to say that as a result, new school buildings were built, and a 13.5-acre recreation center was acquired. Do you have any idea what school buildings that could be, and what 13.5-acre recreation? I'm quoting
that
to you.
That must be Gibbons Park, I guess. I can't imagine. I don't know. In 44?
No. See, I don't know a date. All I know is that this publication was published in 1940.
Oh, the publication was in 1940.
And it's in Brewer's book, and Brewer talks about Gibbons' role. And he says that Gibbons was very instrumental with his people in obtaining passage for this $4.5 million bond issue with the city on the consideration that blacks would be given a proportionate share by their population of the $4.5 million money. And then Brewer goes on to say school buildings were constructed and a, quote, 13.5-acre recreation center, unquote. And, that could be the Rosewood Park. All I know is that this event, this $4.5 million bond issue, occurred before 1940. So the only thing I know of is it could be possibly the Rosewood Recreation Park, or could it be the Doris Miller Auditorium?
Could have been there.
Is Doris Miller right next door to Rosewood?
It's on the Rosewood
property.
It's a part of the Rosewood Park.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it could. Let's see. It could have been that 1940. 1940. No, I don't know. Maybe so, because you see, in many instances, bond issues pass, and there's some years after that before a building is constructed.
Sure.
Because Doris Miller was not constructed in 1940.
I would not think so. It
was much later than that, because it was named for after World War II.
Right.
Because Doris Miller, the fellow for whom the building is named, was killed, or rather, he was the first to be be wounded. I think he died as a result of this. However it goes. Anyway, that would have had to have been after 44.
After the end of the war.
Yeah. Well, it was not. Well, no, it wasn't the end of the war. I don't believe. I think it was constructed during the war.
Oh, it was?
I think it was constructed during the war, as I recall.
Well, I still think that this references to an event that preceded the Doris Miller, because this publication...
Oh, well, I can't imagine what the construction was so far as parks go, unless it was a renovation of the house that was on the ground. That old building that stands up there, there were some additions and some renovations and additions made to that. And I don't know when that was. I'd have to research that.
Yeah, well, there were some renovations made in the very early 1970s, late 60s, but...
No. I'm talking about way back there in the 40s.
I see.
I'm talking about back in the 40s. There had been some renovations to the old house before Doris Miller had ever been built.
I see.
And that's the only thing I know that had been. So the auditorium was constructed. It seems to me that building was constructed during World War II. And now, as for the schools, I don't know whether the Anderson High School that was constructed on Thompson is a part of that bond issue, as well as Keeling. There had already been a Keeling building constructed, but when the new Anderson High School was built, what we call the new Anderson High School on Thompson Street was constructed, then the old Anderson building on Pennsylvania became a part of the Keeling Junior High School, because one school was on was in one block of Pennsylvania,
Mm-hmm.
and the junior school was in the next block on Pennsylvania. And what they did was just combine the two. They built a building between them and joined them.
Mm-hmm.
You see.
I see.
So I don't know whether that might have been a part of that situation. I don't know to what Brewer referred, but it would have been a good thing if he would have named them.
Sure would have.
And it's, we do that sort of writing, it seems, and I don't know what the reason is for not naming. That happens often, that you wonder why people refer to something and then don't give the exact thing that they're talking about. I have no idea why he wouldn't have named the building and named the park construction.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea.
Okay, well, I'm just going to take note of this.
Well, one thing about it, you can pretty much, by deduction, determine which one of those schools, because the date would help there.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember the dates when those schools were constructed at all.
Yeah, I can go back and do that. I don't know how to find out about the prices of bond issues. I'm sure there's some.
Oh, I don't know about that. I would have no idea about that.
Yeah, to try to track down when the $4.5 million one was. Well, are you saying then that Gibbons was the first black leader in East Austin?
No, I wouldn't dare say that.
Do you know?
No, because they must have had leaders in East Austin when he was a little boy.
But you don't know who they were?
No, I really don't, because I don't know that I ever heard them particularly refer to them, but there had to be other persons before he came along in 1907.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's when he got out of school. I think it's the 7 that he graduated from Howard. But prior to that, there had to be some sort of leadership in Austin. Among them, probably Reverend L.L. Campbell.
Right, well, he was certainly going strong at that time.
And I don't know whether Dr. Crawford, Dr. Abner, and as well.
Do you have any recollection or knowledge that Gibbons got his interest in politics or got his start in politics through the good agencies of any of those people?
So the what?
Through L.L. Campbell or through Crawford or Abner? Do you think
I have no idea. No, I surely don't. I don't have any idea at all.
Mm-hmm.
It just, some people just seem to be destined to do certain things, and he seemed to have been one of them.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think.
He was somewhat of, well, he just had that type of drive in him, I suppose. I don't know why. I don't know how it developed. I don't know that, I know nothing at all about his father and mother. I know who they were and all that kind of thing, but I don't, frankly, I don't remember ever seeing them.
Oh, really?
I don't remember ever seeing them. Now, I don't really know. And, sometimes older people are not, unless they're very, very close to you, you're not too interested in them.
Right.
Yeah,
I know. Well, I was just wondering if there was some sort of line of inheritance from one black leader to another, or if
he had an uncle who was a minister, but I don't know whether Reverend Gibbons, as far back as I can remember, Reverend Gibbons was having visual problems, and we considered him as being blind, so that doesn't handicap completely. But I have never heard anything about his uncle, who was the minister, being any sort of leader.
Well, how did L.D. Lyons fit into this? Colonel Lyons, was he a contemporary, and was he also as politically involved?
Well, he was slightly involved. He wasn't like Dr. Gibbons. He didn't have that kind of forceful drive that Dr. Gibbons had.
I see.
He knew quite a few of the political leaders in Austin, and he, as a bondsman, more or less, came in contact with some legal folk, attorneys, and the officials downtown and that kind of thing. And paid the bail for a lot of folks that got in trouble, that kind of thing. But I don't know that I know that he was not the type of leader, political leader that Dr. Gibbons was. He was more or less on the quieter side of it, and yet he was just not the forceful type of person that Dr. Gibbons was.
And it is your impression that he was not involved in as many activities that had a political impact for blacks?
He would get involved in it, as many others probably did. He would be. I could remember him being seated on the platform with he and Dr. Gibbons and Mr. Woodard and Mr. Tears. Those folks would be seated up there, and the politicians who were running for office, would be seated up there, and that kind of thing. But as for the forceful banner of leadership, I wouldn't say that he was that far into the political arena as Dr. Gibbons.
Okay, but aren't we talking about something more than just forceful manner? We're talking about the number of political activities and the ultimate influence of the individual.
Well, I think Dr. Gibbons had the influence.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that Lyons compared with him at all when it comes to political leadership.
Okay.
But yet I wouldn't exclude him. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right, okay. But it is not, you're not saying that it's your impression that Lyons acted as any sort of predecessor to Gibbons.
Oh, no.
No. Okay.
No. He would not be any sort of influence or any role for Dr. Gibbons.
Okay. Well, that's what I was thinking, but I wanted to
clarify. I can't say who is or who would be.
Okay. Well, who
was? I mean, not is, but who was.
Do you think that Gibbons had a protege? Did he train anyone?
He tried to.
Who?
O.H. Elliott. But he never got anywhere with it after Dr. Gibbons died. Yes, he would like to have seen L more active, but Mr. Elliott did not have the drive and the incentives and the vocal abilities that it takes for a politician. And but he definitely would like to have seen Mr. Elliott follow in his footsteps. But that was a handicap that Mr. Elliott had. And the comparison of the two, do you know M.J. Anderson?
I know of him, and I'm going to talk to him next week, as a matter of fact.
You talk to him and see what he will say, because now Dr. Gibbons, Mr. Elliott and Mr. Anderson were very good friends.
Okay.
And they taught together at Samuel Houston College.
Okay.
And of the two, Dr. Gibbons was very friendly with Mr. Elliott. And Mr. Anderson is the one with the gift of gab. And that's what he said when I came. That's why I've gone back to teenage myself as business of gab. Yeah, he has that sort of thing. And
that was something that Gibbons used to talk about?
No. I'm saying this. This is strictly me talking.
Okay.
And but Dr. Gibbons, for whatever the reason, and people have their own reasons. Maybe they couldn't even express. Maybe he wouldn't have even expressed his reason for liking L as he did. We called him L. And over and against Andy, because Andy has that gift of gab, and L did not have it. And the reason I'm saying did is because Elliot is deceased now. But if L had the gift of gab that Andy has, I think he would have been a good follower in Dr. Gibbons' footsteps. Now, see, Arthur D. Whitty was another one that I think would have, or Dr. Gibbons would have, but they sort of had some different ideas from time to time. So I wouldn't say that Arthur D. Whitty was a protege.
Was he as...
Morton was another one who came along.
Morton?
J.H. Morton. Well, Morton and D. Whitty were dealing pretty heavily in the political arena on this side of town, you might say. And they were not as vocal, they were not as vociferous, and they were not as, well, they didn't have what you'd see. Arthur D. Whitty came nearer having it than any of those people, and Morton and D. Whitty were very good friends, and they worked together politically. All of theirs, however, began more or less through the NAACP.
Oh, I see. But Gibbons really didn't do his stuff through the NAACP, did he?
No. Well, he couldn't always agree with what NAACP wanted to do. And then he had closer contact. Dr. Gibbons had better contact with some of the powers that be than any of the officers of the NAACP.
I see.
You see.
So he didn't really need it.
And he didn't always agree. If Dr. Gibbons didn't agree with you and your thoughts and so forth and so on, he didn't bother about it. He went on and did what he wanted to do. And in most instances, got what he wanted to get.
Well, was Arthur D. Whitty a contemporary of Gibbons? He was a little bit younger.
He was younger. That's the reason I named him as a possible protege. I said he would have been a good one. And I think Dr. Gibbons saw this in him, and I believe Dr. Gibbons would have sort of encouraged and stimulated him along. But they did not always agree on things. And when that happened, well, of course, they went their separate ways. Yes, Dr. Gibbons really, I guess I might say, had no contemporaries. In a way, nobody his age group he was almost out there on his own. But as I named to you, these men who were for him and with him, but were not vocal, did not work as hard as he did, and were D.R. Woodard and William M. Tears and L.D. Line. L.D. Line. Now they would get together and they would make some decisions and they would work toward that. But they were not nearly as active as Dr. Gibbons was in speaking out and getting in on these meetings, that kind of thing.
So there were two differences you're talking about. They would get together and sort of make a group decision or strategy, but they did not. But Gibbons didn't necessarily get together and work out a group strategy with them.
Well, he would, yes, he would, but he was the leader in it. He took the leadership most of it. They would come along with him, but he did most of the planning. He did most of the I suppose made most of the contacts and that kind of thing. That's the way I felt about it. That he was actually the leader.
Right.
And people back in that day got to be known as a leader. I remember here about 10 years ago, someone asked me, who would I consider as the leader among Negroes in East Austin? I said, we don't have a leader in East Austin. I said, things are just not like they used to be. That people have their own thoughts, and really this question was asked because they were trying to determine how the people in East Austin, and at that time, when you said East Austin, it meant Negroes. It did not mean Mexicans. It meant Negroes. And when they asked me that question, how do you think the Negroes of East Austin will vote? You can tell how it's going to vote. There is no leadership. You know, there's no one person leading East Austin. That's true as of today.
So what you're saying is that
Dr. Gibbons was the leader
right.
in East Austin during his period of time.
So he was the single most vocal and visible and influential
At that
black
time.
leader.
Right, politically. I'm talking about we're talking about
Right.
politics now.
Right, not religion or anything
Not
else.
religion, not education. Now, education-wise, yes, he spoke out vocally and he probably did a lot to it. But there again, it's the political side of education that he was involved in. See, now, when it came to curriculum and that sort of thing, he probably wouldn't bother at all.